الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. Once again, we have been blessed with this opportunity of the month of Ramadan to go through one of the surahs of the Quran. The surah selected for the 2 weeks that I'm here is the famous surah known as Surah Yasin, where almost everyone recites this more regularly than other surahs. We have looked at the 5 ayat beginning from Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Yasin wal-Quran al-Hakim, innaka lamin al-mursaleen, ala siratim mustaqim, tanziz al-aziz ar-Rahim. Just to connect with the discussion that we have previously, this is a surah which is known as Qalb al-Quran. It is the heart of the Quran. And it's known as Qalb al-Quran because it is in the honor of the one who is Qalb al-Alam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Even the theme actually which deals with the 3 fundamental concepts of Islam, Tawheed, Nubuwwat and Qiyamat. But in the sequence here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts with Nubuwwat first, and then he talks about Tawheed and ends with a discussion on Qiyamat. The earlier 5 ayat, we looked at the 4 ayat the night before. Last night we just concentrated in the 5th one, last line. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the Prophet. Yasin, O Yasin. This is the name of the Prophet. Wal Quran al-Hakim, I swear by the wise Quran. Innaka lamin al-mursaleen, verily, indeed you are from the messengers. Ala siratim mustaqim, on the straight path. Tanziz al-aziz al-Rahim, this is the sentence that we discussed last night. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after testifying in a way or confirming the nubuwwat of Rasulullah, he uses the Quran, wal Quran al-Hakim, that by the Quran which is wise, that Muhammad is from the Mursaleen and he is on Sirat al-Mustaqim. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this Quran that I have used as the basis for Qasam, this is Tanzil al-Aziz al-Rahim. This is a revelation which has come down gradually from the Lord who is powerful and merciful. We talked about the nuzul of Quran in 2 different forms, and why has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chosen the terms Aziz and Rahim, which are kind of opposites, powerful and merciful. But then there was a reason that we discussed yesterday. Just to continue with the next ayat number 6 for this evening. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. The simple translation would be so that you may, referring to the Prophet, that the Prophet has been sent and the Quran was revealed for what? So that you may warn thereby a people whose ancestors had not been warned before, and therefore they were heedless and in the state of ghaflat. Let us look at this ayat tonight. As I mentioned, we might not be able to finish Surah Yasin in the 2 weeks, but inshallah we'll continue when I come on the first Thursday of the month until we come to the end of that surah. When we look at this sentence here, لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. The first 2 words, li and tunzir. Tunzir is a verb. La there is actually not part of that word. That is by itself. And lam with kathra there is actually, which means the reason for it. After describing the Prophet and the Quran, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the purpose. Why He sent the Prophet and why He revealed this wise book, wal Quran al-Hakim. Li stands for that explanation. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا, to warn the people of Allah's punishment if they do not heed to the message which has come by the Prophet and the Quran. Now, tunzir is to warn. That is why the Prophet is known as Nadhir, as opposed to Bashir. Bashir is someone who gives good news, that if you follow, you get Jannah. Nadhir is the one who gives the warning, that if you don't follow, you know the consequences. And that is where we call the Prophet, he is not only Bashir, he is also Nazir, and he is not only Nadhir, he is also Bashir. These days, people don't like that. They say, oh, only talk about good things. Everybody is okay. Yes, everybody is okay, but then, you have to realize that not everybody is okay. There are issues and problems. You look at any level of society, there are problems. And the problems happen because people do not sound the warning where they are, supposed to sound. And that is where this process of, Nadhir and Bashir has to go hand in hand. Rasulullah was not only Bashir, he was also Nadhir. Neither was he just a Nadhir, he was also there giving Basharat also. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا. Now, and this is the beauty of the Quran. Sometimes when we look at the ayat, they look like they are disjointed, not connected. But it's very much linked to the ayat before. Tanzeel al-Aziz al-Rahim. Quran is revelation from a Lord who is Aziz. Aziz means powerful. Rahim means who is merciful. Since he says that I am Aziz, which means, don't take this message lightly. If you don't follow, I have the power to punish you. This is linked to that. لِتُنْظِرَ, I have sent this down. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. The Prophet has come and the Quran has come so that he may, warn the people about not, if you don't follow the Quran, what will happen. Now, who were the people who are being initially warned by the Prophet? Of course, he is Rahmatul lil Alameen. He is a Rasul for all people. But Quran was revealed in Mecca at that time, this surah. And so there is an immediate audience that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to them. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. So who are the people who are being warned? The literal translation would be that, to warn the people whose ancestors had not been warned, referring to the people of Mecca. Now you would say, well, how can this be true? There were others who came. Ibrahim and Ismail were in Mecca. Many of these people from Mecca are from Ali Ismail. And that's where we put this emphasis on immediate ancestors. Between Isa ibn Maryam and Rasulullah, there is a gap of about 500 years. In those 500 years, there was no Nabi who had come there. And so, remember, it doesn't refer all the way back to the day of Adam. This ayat is talking about the immediate ancestors of Mecca. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that for a time being, just before the Rasul came, there was no Munzir, there was no Nadhir who had come and given them, warnings. It doesn't mean there was not guidance there. Ibrahim alayhi salam had come, Ismail had come, and the Deen Hanif was there among some of the people of Mecca. Ancestors of Rasulullah were all muwahideen. When we look at the Ziyarat Warisa of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, we recite there that, you were Noor fil aslab al-shamikha wal arham al-mutahhara. All your ancestors from Adam to the last one, Ali and Fatima, they were all, from that line of muwahideen. And so there were people in Mecca, especially the family, the immediate ancestors of Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'minin going up. They were from the muwahideen, followers of the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And some of them were awliya, who basically represented that deen and message brought by Ibrahim alayhi salam. But there was no Nabi. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Now I have raised a prophet among you so that he may warn you, referring to the people whose immediate ancestors were not warned. As I mentioned earlier, that there is no prophet between Ibrahim and Ismail and coming of Rasulullah. But just to make a point, yesterday we said that there were 124,000 prophets, and the prophet here has been mentioned, إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. How many Rasul were out of 124,000 prophets? 313. So the Mursaleen were 313. Among those Anbiya, since we are talking about this special Qawm from Mecca and the surrounding area, 4 of them were Arab. Not all. Out of 124,000, only 4 of them were, what did I do here? Hud alayhi salam, Salih alayhi salam, Shu'aib alayhi salam, and then Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Hud, Salih, Shu'aib, and our Prophet, they are 4 from the Anbiya who were Arabic. Going on with this ayat, we come to the last of this statement, لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. Because there was no nadhir, there was nobody to warn them constantly, again and again and again, these people had gone into the state of ghaflat. They had become heedless, careless about serious issues of life. And this is where we see that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it, that because there was no prophet to warn them, constantly they had become from the ghafilun. What is ghaflat? We probably need more than a half an hour to talk about it, but I'll just summarize it. Ghaflat is actually the state of total, this is level 0. When we talk about spiritual development, when a person, we say he's at 0 level, this is the state of ghaflat. And the first step after that is known as, yaqwa, which means a person is now conscious. He is awake. And when we talk about this state of ghaflat, what does it mean? It actually means that a person does not use the faculties of aql and the senses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to him. This is the most precious, gift that Allah has given to human beings. Aql as well as the 5 senses, which become tools in order to get the information, which is sent to the mind, which processes that information, and the conclusion is known as ilm. This is a summary of the whole, long discussion here. And when a person does not use these faculties given to him or her by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person is known to be in the state of ghaflat. Means he has the ability, but he's not using it in the right way. And this is where, I'll just go to one ayat of Quran to explain that phenomenon. لِتُنْظِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنْظِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. There is one ayat in Surah Araf, ayat number 179, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very clearly says, لَقَدْ ذَرَعْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ. That we have certainly prepared many jinn and human beings for the Jahannam. And so this is what Allah says, very clear. There is no, ambiguity in this statement from the Quran. Why does He say this? And what is the reason He is giving for it? That He is actually prepared. He is going to put some jinn and ins, human beings, into Jahannam. Why? What were they doing? The reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives is, number 1, لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have minds, but they do not understand by them. The word qulub in Quran doesn't mean this heart, physical heart. It actually refers to the aql or the mind. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the first reason that I have decided to put them into Jahannam is because I have given them aql, but they do not use it to understand the realities. Number two, وَلَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. And they have eyes, but they do not see by them. What does it mean? They mean they need glasses? No. They have to go to the eye doctor? No. They have eyes. They see things. Seeing is one thing, and to understand and get inside is something else. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and this is only he who can say this, very beautiful statement in one of his statements where he says, you know, don't look at the dunya. Look through the dunya. He says, if you look at the dunya, you will become blind. If you look through the dunya, you will see the reality. You know, we see the dunya around. Death is there, misery is there, problems are there. Still we don't get the ibrat and lessons from it. And so he says, don't look at it, look through it. And this is actually in the context where when somebody was condemning the dunya, so-called religious people. You know, they say, oh, dunya is bekar hai sab. Nahin, bekar nahi hai, ye kaam ki cheez hai. Your akhirat depends on this dunya. You don't build your akhirat when you reach there. There will be nothing for you. You build your akhirat in this dunya. That's where Amir al-Mu'mineen says, don't blame the dunya. You look at it. Whereas the dunya itself is, you know, calling you loudly that don't look at me, look through me. Learn the lessons from me. You know, the example I would give just to simplify this concept that Amir al-Mu'mineen is mentioning about don't look at the dunya, look through the dunya. I'm sure many of us have a mirror before we leave our home, just to make sure we look okay. It's human nature. Even Islam says when you go outside, be presentable. When you look at the mirror, there are two ways of looking at it. You know, one you say, oh, the frame is very good. You know, it is made in this company or this country. That is one way of looking at the mirror. And other is you can looking at the image inside the mirror. What is the actual purpose of looking at the mirror? To admire the frame? Or to look at the image of yourself inside the mirror? This is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying. Don't look at the dunya. Look through the dunya. Because the dunya is talking to you. You see your image inside it. And that is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying. And this is what the ayat of Quran says, لَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ. They have eyes. They are not blind. Physically it's okay. لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. But they do not see through it. وَلَهُمْ أَعْضَانٌ. And they have ears. لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. But they do not hear through it. It's not that they are deaf or there is a problem. You know, physically it's perfect. But the lessons that they need to derive from what they hear, the words of the Quran or the hikmah from the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, it doesn't have an impact. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then He concludes, أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. Such human beings, you know, who have the mind but they don't use it. They have the eyes but they don't use it. They have the ears but they don't use it. They are like the cattle. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as if, you know, stops for a moment. He says, no, they are even worse than that. Because the cattle have not been given the aql. They just live by their instinct. Human being has been given the aql. And if he doesn't use it, then he is worse. بَلْ هُوَ أَضَلُّ. He is worst and more misguided. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْغَافِلُونَ. These are the people who are in the state of ghaflat. This is where we come to the definition of who is ghafil. Ghafil is somebody who doesn't use his power of intelligence and the senses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to an individual. Salawat upon the Prophet. To connect to the general theme of this first segment of Surah Yasin, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the nubuwwat and risalat of our Prophet and the Quran. This is where we have to also, look at it. If you remember last night, we talked about the levels of seeking guidance from the Quran. The ayat that we saw, the dua of Prophet Ibrahim, and the two ayat where Allah responds to it about the Prophet. And there the issue was that, we learned three things, three T's, if you remember that. One was talawat, the second was tazkiyah, and the third was ta'aleem. That the function of the Prophet is to recite the ayat of the Quran for the people. The second one was to purify their soul, tazkiyah, and the third was the function of the Prophet is ta'aleem. يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, to teach the holy book and the wisdom. The words of the Prophet, the ahadith of the Prophet is hikmah. Al-Kitab is the Quran. And when you look at that, it shows that the first step in learning from the Quran, seeking guidance from the Quran, is the talawat. And that's why there is so much emphasis in talawat, especially during the month of Ramadan. And we talked about some of the ahadith which has emphasized this point quite a lot. However, talawat by itself is not the end. That is the beginning of the journey of understanding Quran. It is very much like wudu. Is wudu wajib by itself? Is there any state where we are told we must be in wuzu? No. It is sunnat to be in wuzu, but there is no wuzu by itself which is wajib. It only becomes wajib as a muqaddama of wajib. So I had to do namaz. Namaz is wajib. Can I do namaz without wuzu? No. Then wuzu becomes a wajib, not by itself. لا بنفسه بل بغيره. Wudu becomes a wajib not for its own sake but because of namaz. Talawat is very important. It's a very important step in understanding the Quran, but talawat is not done for the sake of talawat. Talawat is done for the sake of understanding, purifying ourselves, and living by the Quran, so that we can become among those who are known as Hamilin al-Quran. Now, Hamilin al-Quran also has two different forms. One is what we see in Surah Jumu'ah. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا. The example of those who carry the Torah and do not practice that is the example of the donkey carrying the books. So just reading the Quran by itself is not a purpose. That is just a means to something else, which is to understand the Quran and to live by the Quran. And that is where sometimes we, do not understand the means and the goal. And the whole life is spent in perfecting our talawat, which is very important, but not as a purpose. That is just a means to achieve another goal. Amir al-Mu'minin talks about this issue of, how do you get out of ghaflat? In order to get out of that state of ghafilun, we need to, revive our heart. When we talk about the heart, it goes through different stages. There could be a healthy heart and there can be a sick heart. We are not talking about the sickness and the health from the physical point of view. We are talking about the spiritual, sickness and health here. In one of the khutbah number 110, Amir al-Mu'minin says, وَتَعَلَّمُ الْقُرْآنِ فَإِنَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْحَدِيثِ. Learn the Quran, because it is the best of discourse. And then he says something, وَتَفَقَّهُ فِيهِ فَإِنَّهُ رَبِيعُ الْقُلُوبِ. And understand and ponder and reflect on the Quran, because it is the spring for your hearts. Rabi'ul Quran. Rabi means the spring season. Rabi'ul Qulub. This is where Imam is saying that Quran is Rabi'ul Qulub. If you look at the example of seasons, the way Amir al-Mu'minin is using it, in the winter time, the earth dies. Quran uses this word, mayta. But then the season changes. Spring comes in, water comes down, the earth becomes more soft, and that is where we say that the earth is now revived. Murda zameen jo hai ab zinda ho rahi. Similarly, our heart, because of the sins and guna, it becomes dead. We have this concept of, zamir mar gaya. The conscious is dead. In order to revive that heart, this is where talawat comes in. And this is where Amir al-Mu'minin is saying, not only talawat, tafaqqahu, understand the Quran. The more you understand the Quran, the more you reflect on the Quran, this is where you will see it will revive the dead heart. And so when we talk about the revival of the heart in a spiritual level, you don't need this shock. Rather, what you need is reflection on the Quran. Read the Quran, reflect on it, and you will see that you will get out of the state of ghaflat and heedlessness, and this is where the consciousness will come in. And of course, this cannot be done without the guidance of the Prophet himself and our Imams, because they are the source for us at all stages of spiritual development. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand the Quran and to be among the true followers of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam.